For some of you, I'm not a very familiar face up here. I'm usually back there behind things. And I'm a bit nervous, but you know what? So, I will try to pray without losing my stuff. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. I thank you for the opportunity to be in front of these people, not because I deserve to be, but because you've called me to be. Amen. Although I don't understand that, nor will I ever, you are in control. And God, I pray that your Spirit will dwell here this morning, and that whatever I do say will not fall on deaf ears, but there will be a glimmer of truth in it for someone. I pray these things in your name. Amen. So, Pastor Nate and I have been talking the last several months, and about 2 months ago, we were talking, and he throws out this supposedly a joke that I, at some point, will be in front of people. And ever since I was probably in junior high, that calling, if you will, was on me. But I have for years pushed it away and thought I could serve in many other capacities besides this. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So he had asked, I have this great idea, we're going to do these Share Sundays, storytelling. So my degree is actually in theater. I went to school at the University of West Florida up in Pensacola, Florida, and I graduated with a theater degree. And I've done some theater since then. Unfortunately, it's not my lot in life. One day, perhaps I'll be back on stage. But he had said, I'd like you to share your testimony, and one of the things, and part of it, I think, was the fact that the church get to know who the leadership in the church is, and I hate to say that I'm a leader, but I am one of the deacons, and so here's an opportunity for you to get to know me a little bit, a little background, and then I'm going to just share a few things that I felt in the last several weeks God has been using to just continue to work on me and push me forward and do what he's asked me to do. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Michael. I grew up in New York. Rochester is my home. That's where I was raised. The only one that's still there is my oldest sister. But I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I grew up in a Christian home. From the day I was born, I was in a church pew. And sometimes I often looked at that as a setback rather than something to be really proud of. Thank you. I'll go through that box. You might need to. Pardon me. I was raised in the church from day one, and I've been on stage since I was probably 4 years old. Me and my best friend Chris, we often sat in the front row, and when we had to sing, we sang at the top of our lungs, and we had all kinds of emotions to the songs. And I remember the pastor at one point, he says, "You just got to see these 2 boys up here," and he brought us to stage and said, "Now we're going to do the same song, and you're going to do exactly what you did." And from that moment, I love being on the stage. But usually I'm playing a different character. I'm usually someone entirely different, and I think that's what being on stage has always been a draw, because I can be anybody I want to be, and people don't have to see me. They see the character that I present. And I think life is a bit like that. You know, every day we wake up, and we put a face on and we say, "Hey world, this is me." Yet when we get behind closed doors, we find ourselves an entirely different person. And we wish sometimes, that people could see the real us so that we could just be who God created us to be. So, growing up in the church, I grew up in the Baptist faith, and as many of you know, being in any kind of religious faith, we were not looked upon very favorably. I remember probably in 4th grade the first time I recognized, or I was able to put a word with my sexuality. I remember sitting in front of the television watching Charlie's Angels. My mother was sitting in her chair, my sisters were on the floor, and I was sitting in the rocking chair watching the television show, and I'm going to embarrass myself here, but the Charlie's Angels were partnering up with another detective agency who are all men, and one of the girls and this man had to go undercover, and they were going into a gymnasium and working out and stuff. And one of the guys, he had to take off his shirt. And out loud, as clear as day, I said, "Oh my gosh, he's gorgeous." And my mother's eyes got as large as saucers. And my sister, her head went around, and she said, "Mom, did he just say what I think he said?" Now, granted, I was like 7 years old, 8 years old. And she said, "Yes, and we will never speak of this day again." So that was my first inclination that, I'm not supposed to have those feelings, and so I suppressed them for quite some time. But it wasn't really but 7 years later that I was in junior high, and I knew these feelings were real, and I decided to tell one of my teachers, and just said, "I really don't know what I am, or if there's a word that goes with this, but I am attracted to boys." And he said, "It's going to be all right." I really appreciated the way he handled it. But because I was also in a Christian school, that certainly wasn't favorable, and I still had to suppress those feelings for quite some time. And so I went on to be a part of a music ministry. I did not go into college right away. I knew that I wasn't ready. And I'm kind of giving you tidbits of my life, but it will all kind of come clear when it comes back to the scripture that we used this morning. So when I was in high school, it was time to decide where I was going to go to college. And so my mother, just like all of my siblings, she's like, "We're going to go take a summer, and we're going to just travel to all the different colleges that you want to, or you think you're going to attend." And because I was the youngest of 5, I had been to hundreds, or many, many, many colleges already from my brothers and sisters going. So I kind of was able to go, "Nope, I'm not going to where they're going, and I don't like that." And so I had found a college out in Iowa called Northwestern, and it was a Dutch Reformed Christian college, and I loved it. We went during our my Easter break. My mom, dad, and myself got in the car, and we drove a full 24 hours out west. And it was kind of funny. My mom said, "Now, all of your siblings have gone south. I'm tired of seeing the south." She said, "Go somewhere different." So when I picked Iowa, she says, "Not that different." She goes, "It just smells like pigs here." And I'm like, "Well, that's Iowa for you." So we got there, and I fell in love with the college. It was an incredible art school. Theater was really top-notch. And I had already in my mind, before I left, decided that's where I'm going. And previously to going to that week trip with my parents, I had flown down to Pensacola, and there's a Christian college there called Pensacola Christian College. And my mother really wanted me to go to there. And I had already gotten a scholarship there for voice, and I got a Christian leadership scholarship from there, from my school, to attend there. But I just was like, I don't really want to go there. It's extremely strict. And at the time, it was just me being somewhat rebellious and saying, that's not where God's not calling me there. So it was time to choose, and my mom pulled me into her room. And prior to this, there's a group called Life Action Ministries, and they're out of Buchanan, Michigan, Niles, Michigan, right up by South Bend, Indiana, if you know where Notre Dame is. That's about a half an hour north of where the college is. And there is a Christian ministry, and so I auditioned for them back in September. And I was really eager to go there, and that's another whole part of my life. But the point being is, this is now late April, early June. It's time to make a decision where I'm going to be in the fall. And so my mom brings me to her bedroom. She goes, Michael, I just want to ask, where do you think you want to go to college? And I said, Mom, I really want to go to Northwestern. That's really where I feel I need to be. And she was a little uncomfortable with it for two reasons. One, it wasn't as Christian as she would like. Didn't follow our faith that we were raised in as strictly as she had hoped. And it was expensive, and I understood that. But her response, again, just proved to me how much my parents did love me. And she said, I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but if that's where you want to go, we're going to get you there. So, but the next question out of her mouth was, you know what about that Life Actions group? You really wanted to sing with them. And I said, Mom, it's been 6 months. It's not going to happen. On God's word, not even a minute later, Life Action calls and says, I know it's been 6 months, but we would like you to sing for us. So that was the first time that I recognized that God said, you're not going anywhere but here. And I'm going to prove to you that that's where you need to be. And so I went, and for 4 years I was a singer, a performer, a theater, a stage, all kinds of stuff. And I kind of, if you will, as much as I kind of moved up the ranks with my team members, and I ended up becoming what they called their stage manager, which I was in charge of all the acting and the staging and where they move on stage and training them. And I did this. Even after I left, I was there for another 2 or 3 summers, training them for the 2 months over the summer. And after my 4th year, I realized it was really time to go to college. And but I really loved what I did with Life Action. And I had said, you know, if I could only take 2 or 3 months off of just traveling, I'm really just physically exhausted from the wear and tear on us setting up and stuff. And so I decided I was going to go to college, and I ended up going to what's now called CIU, Columbia International University, which is in Columbia, South Carolina. And I loved it. It was the first time that I had really been on my own, not been surrounded by my parents or all these people that I had been singing with for years. And it was really a first exposure to test my faith. And I had been there for 4 months, and I had intended to stay there for 4 years. But at Christmas time, one of the girls that I had traveled with, she was getting married, and she asked me to come back and sing in her wedding. And so there was 4 of us that were very close, and we did a quartet at her wedding. And afterwards, one of the directors of Life Action came up to me, and she said, we would really like you to come back and be a representative for our ministry. You know the ministry more than many people do. You've been on the road, and so you know what is expected of our singers, and we think you would fit well. And I said, you know, I'm flattered by the fact of you asking me, but I really want to go back to college. I finally made some real friends. Not that I hadn't had any before, but I was making, if you will, a place for myself at this college. And I said, but I'll pray about it. And one of the things that kind of led me to making the decision that I did is because up until this point, everybody that was part of that ministry was asked to raise their own funds as a missionary. And that was a real difficult process. I had just told all of my supporters who I had previously had that I was going to college, and so all that money stopped coming in. Yet, they came to me and they said, I know this is uncanny, or this is not really how we do things, but we're going to pay you to come back. So again, the second time God says, although you're doing great at college, that's not where I want you. I want you back here. So I went back to Michigan, and I was there for 9 months, again, recruiting all the new team members, being what, if you will, a mentor to all the new men coming into the ministry, trying to get them settled, telling them what it is that they should expect. And in the fall, the team that I had once traveled with was missing one of their singers, their bass singer. And I said, you know what, I really would love to go back on the road. I think this is what I'd like to do. And so I went to the director and I said, you know, I realize that we're one down, and If you'd like, I'll go back on the road. And he was ecstatic. Oh, that would be wonderful. And so I did the what we call our dress rehearsal. And while I'm doing the dress rehearsal, as wonderful as it was to be back in that state of being on stage and performing, there was a heaviness on my heart. And at the end of it, I had to go to the director and I said, this can't be. God is not asking me to come back here. As much as I think he can use me wherever he puts me, on stage we're portraying this persona, if you will, this life that we should trust and obey God in any situation that we are in, and we need to obey what he tells us to do. And right now, as much as I love this ministry, I'm not obeying. I need to go home and prepare myself for the next thing, whatever that thing was. So, of course, it was embarrassing to go to my team and say, hey, sorry, I can't do it. But I did. I went home, back to Rochester, and I existed. I hate to say that, but I existed without really a direction for about 9 months. And about June, July came, and I thought, okay, school, the opportunity to go to college again is coming, but I really need to do some soul searching and ask God where it is that he wants me to go. And I went to various colleges that I had would have liked to have gone. I would have liked to have gone back to Columbia International, but that was a closed door. And so the still small voice said, Pensacola. And I said, oh, that doesn't sound really promising. But as I continued to pray about it, it was clear as day that I needed to be back in Pensacola. And so I packed my car and drove to Pensacola Christian College. And I was there for 2.5 years. And I say that because this was another growing process. I was an older student. I had started off as a freshman, but I was at that time 26 years old, or 24. And so they threw me into the freshman dorm. So my roommates were 18-year-olds, and I was 24, and I was like, oh, you're so immature. But I made some really strong friendships with those first few roommates, and I learned a lot. And again, God was stretching me and telling me, these are the things that I want you to do, where you need to be, how I want you to be. And it was 2 years later where I had the opportunity to move off campus and not live on the dorms because of my age. They gave you the option of living off campus if you wanted to. Now, prior to this, I was obviously attending the church campus that the college required us to be at. And the pastor at one point said, can you believe the gay community has their own church? And he mentioned Metropolitan Community Church, MCC. And my ears perked up, and I went, what? I said, you mean Christianity and our sexuality can coexist? And I don't want to say I'd been through major counseling, but I always felt like the two could not coexist. The pastors I would be under would say, you need to pray more, you need to work harder at pushing those feelings aside, and yada, yada, yada. We are familiar with that. So I decided to call this MCC church up and say, when are your services? And they said, well, it starts at 11 o'clock. And I said, okay. So I started to rearrange my schedule where I would go to the campus church for Sunday school at 8 o'clock. Then I would go to the main service at 9:30. And then I would jump in my car and I would run downtown to the MCC church. And I'd start attending MCC. And I did that for about 4 months. And God just began to say, you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. I know you love me. I love you. And you can coexist. You can be who you are. You can love who you are. You can love whom you wish to. But you can also love me. And that was a huge moment in my life where I finally accepted who I was. But what had happened is I finally had the nerve to call up my mother. And now, remember, I had said that in 7th grade I had told my teacher that I was gay, or that I was having these feelings. And one of the things that came out of that was that you needed to, the pastor at the time said, things are going to be fine, but one of your parents needs to know this information. We can't keep this information from your parents. So me and my mother have always been very close. We're like two peas in a pod. I get the emotion from her, so I'll thank my mother for all my tears. But I said, I can't hurt my mother with this information. I'll tell my dad. I don't care what he thinks. So I still didn't have enough nerve to have the conversation with my father, so I wrote him a letter, told him all the things that I thought I needed to tell him, and I put it in his lunchbox and had him read it at lunch at some point, not knowing that I had hid it there. So the next day, now my mother, again, we went to a Christian school. My mother was a teacher at that school. So I always just rode with my mother to school. I never got on the bus. And she comes out to breakfast. She says, Dad's going to take you to school today. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. He never does that, but okay. And we get in the car, the truck, and Dad sits in the truck. He'll buckle his seatbelt, and he looks over at me, and he goes, so, how you doing with your problem? And I said, well, Dad, I'm still gay. It doesn't go away in a day. I'm still struggling with it, but, that's the way it is. He goes, okay. That was the gist of the conversation, and ever since then, I don't think he ever really felt awkward, or it was just, you're my son, I don't care. That's the end of that conversation, And I had, again, realized that my parents were just as loving as they could be without me understanding at that time. So, fast forward another, again, almost 15 years, and I'm back at college, going to MCC, and I called my mother up and I said, Mom, I know you don't like the fact that I'm gay, but I got to deal with this. I'm tired of putting on a mask every day, going to school and being someone that I'm not. I said, everybody around me is always asking, who are you dating? What girl are you going to take to the prom? Yada, yada, yada. And I don't like that because that's not who I am. I'm never going to take a girl to a prom. Sorry, it's not going to happen. Well, my roommate at the time was listening in on the whole conversation, and he was a graduate of the college, again, Pensacola, and he came into the room and he says, what's this all about? And I knew at that time that I was making a decision that was going to affect the rest of my life, because when I'm honest here, it's going to not backfire, but it's going to project me in a direction that I have never gone before. And in doing so, he went to the dean of men of the college and outed me. And he then proceeded to call or talk to me the next night and says, well, the dean of men is interested in talking to you, and you need to be home at such and such an hour because he's going to make a telephone call, and you need to be here to accept it. So I did accept that phone call, and the long story short, they kicked me out. They had said, you're not welcome here, you need to get off of campus, and you cannot communicate with anybody else on campus because everyone else will be guilty by association. And a lot of people say, well, how can you be so calm? Are you not angry at this organization? Yada, yada, yada. And when I finished that conversation with the Dean of Men, I said, I want you to understand that I understand what you're doing because I was raised in this bubble of understanding. And I said, but I want you to understand that I think you're wrong, and that I hope one day you will recognize your fault, and that God will not just forgive you, but just he will soften your heart to accept those who might be different than yourself. So I went from having friends and a place to be to nothing. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I went to the MCC church after I got kicked out of the school. And I said, I'm homeless, basically. And at that time, I had begun singing with a choir, and one of the guys in the choir said, I have a big home, and I have nobody living in it except me. He says, so I'm going to provide you with a room, And then when you get your feet, settled, then we'll talk about having a rent and you can pay and stuff. But I realize you're in a predicament. So for the next 2 years, I was able to live with this gentleman and get on my feet. And step by step, every step, God provided me with a job. And then he, again, as I said, provided me with a home and provided me with new friends. And this is kind of a step back. When I went to the MCC for the first time, at the end of the service, the pastor said, if there's anyone new here, raise your hand and stand up and wave it, introduce yourself. And another gentleman stood up, and I didn't think anything about it. But afterwards, they had a social, and we sat across from one another, and he says, hi, my name's Jason. I'm Michael. And he says, this is my first day, too. And he's my best friend. I say we're separated physically in the sense of geographical location, but on that day, God put into my life one of the best people I could ever have met. And he has been an encouragement. And so again, God had his hand, said, it's okay, you just obey me. Do what you're supposed to do when I'm asking you to do it, and I'm going to provide you the means to make it happen. So it took me about 2.5 years to really kind of get myself in a place where I could go back to college. So I ended up going back to college at the University of West Florida. Luckily, they were very familiar with the Christian college and the education that they gave, and they took all of my credits. They said, we understand where you're coming from, and all of your credits are still valid. We're going to take it all. So I didn't have to start off again at freshman year. I came in as a junior and went through my years of finished my degree. And I was in a much better place because now I have an accredited license. And again, I graduated with a degree in theater. So I was like, what am I going to do with this? I just did it because it was something I was good at and I had a fun time doing it. But I had no intention of going to New York City. I didn't want that life. It's like, I don't want to be a waiter for 10 years before I get a walk-on part, So I thought, what's the next best thing? So I went to Disney. So I moved to Orlando, and again, this was one of those things where I had decided, I don't know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, but I know I don't need to be here any longer. So I packed my car. I called Jason up. I said, hey, you want to go to Orlando with me? He goes, why? And I said, because I'm moving. He's like, what? He says, when you going? I said, next week. He's like, okay, I'll be there. So he and I drove down. Didn't have a place to live. Didn't have a job. No, it's not true. I did transfer. I transferred with Pier 1 Imports. Yay for us. My Pier 1 partner over there. So I was there about a month before I got an interview with Disney, and they saw that I had theater background, and they picked me up, and I was doing presentations. They called me a presenter. I basically gave educational spiels to children, and I loved what I did, and I kind of moved up the ladder there as well. They had said no one gets a new position within the first 6 months of being here, and they recognized that I could perform, and so they started asking, would you train people? So I started training my department. And then one of the people from the park was coming through and kind of doing management control, see if everything was still up to par and everything. And he saw my show, and he pulled me aside and says, you're doing a really great job. I'd like you to be a trainer for the corporate, for Epcot as well. So I ended up becoming a trainer for the Epcot park. And I saw that I was kind of progressing in that way, but it was started about 6 months, maybe 8 months into me performing at Disney, where parents would come up to me and say, hey, where do you teach? What grade level do you teach? Where did you go to college to teach? And I said, well, I'm not an educator. My degree's in theater. And they said, you're wasting your time here. You need to be in front of children. You have a way with words, and kids are attracted to you. They're glued to you. You have some gift. And I neglected that part of my life too, because my entire family are teachers. My grandfather, my mother, all of my siblings were teachers. And I didn't want to be going into that profession just because everybody else was doing it. It was the thing to do. I was like, let me try something different. But that was not the case. And as I continued to hear this over and over, I was like, God, I got it. I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach. So literally, it was June. The next weekend, there was an advertisement on the television or in the newspaper saying that Florida was really out of teachers and they needed people, and come to this expo. So I went to the expo and thinking, I might get a job as a theater teacher, possibly. Again, my degree's not in teaching, so I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. So I ended up going to this, and I interviewed with 3 or 4 different schools, and I ended up with 2 that I really was, well, actually 1 that I really, really liked. It was there in Orlando, and they had me come back 3 or 4 different times, meeting different staff members, and they're like, we really like you, I was like, I really like you too. And I had said to them, they had called me up and said, we really would like to hire you, but we lost your resume. We can't find it. We put it down on a desk and it's disappeared. And I'm saying, okay, well, again, this was the place I wanted to go, but there was this other school that was about 3.5 hours south of Orlando, and they called and they said, I know that you were at the expo and we would really like you come down for an interview. And I said, well, I'm really looking at this one close to home. It was like 15 minutes from my current house that I was living at, and they said, we understand, not a big problem. And so I thought that was done. And they called back a second time, probably a week later, and I says, no, they're still interviewing me. This is now my 4th visit, and it looks very promising. And they said, okay. Well, a week later comes back, and the one that I was interested in, the school, they called and said, you know what? In this week's time of you getting your resume back to us, we interviewed one other individual, and she's been teaching for 6 years, and we really need to go with someone with a little bit more experience because of the caliber of our department. And I said, I totally understand, it's not a problem. Click, hang up. And 2 minutes later, ding, 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 the second school calls back and says, hey, I know you really don't want to come down, but would you be interested? And I said, God, this is another calling, literally. They asked, when can you be here? I says, well, I have Friday off. This was Wednesday. And I said, I'll be there down Friday. So I drove the 3 hours south and started talking to her. Her name was Miss Pro-Aunt Jean. And she started talking to me as if she had already given me the job. And when I left, she says, you have the job if you'd like it. And I already knew prior to leaving that I was going to take it, but you can't be too eager. So I was like, give me a few days to think about this, And as I left, hindsight, I said, could you lead me downtown? Like, where is downtown so I can get something to eat? I have a long drive before I go back to Orlando. She goes, you are downtown. And I said, well, where's the place to eat? She goes, over there. And we had a Burger King and a Dollar General. That was the town. And one gas station as you were leaving. And the town was called Moorhaven, Florida. It's out by Lake Okeechobee. So I ended up moving there and I was there for 4 years. And it was probably the best place that God, in his wisdom, obviously, could have placed me, because I had the support of that principal who was on her way out after I had left, but she basically held my hand and said, this is what you do and this is what you don't do, and this is how you become a teacher. And I had a very supportive staff then, but at 4 years I thought, well, the media center clerk, the librarian, she comes in, she goes, you know what, I signed on for 1 year. I just thought my husband and I was going to be here for a year because he wanted to be a coach and he needed some experience. He says, and now I've been here 40 years. And I'm like, I got to get out of here. I said, that's the push I needed. So once again, I started praying and saying, God, I don't necessarily know where I'm supposed to be, but it's not here. And he gave me a clear direction that was true. And so at the time, my cousin lived in Fort Myers, and I thought, well, it seems to be as good a place as any. But my cousin, within I don't know, a few weeks of me saying I was going to go there. He says, oh, I'm moving back to Washington, D.C., so you'll be all by yourself. I'm like, no, I guess I'm not going there. So I did have one friend here in Fort Lauderdale. And I said, well, I have one friend. Again, I didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, but I knew I wasn't going to be where I was supposed to, I wasn't going to live in Moorhaven anymore, so I decided that I was going to come here. So I drove into town, and literally probably on my way or even a day after I got here, a friend of mine calls who lived in Pensacola, and he says, I hear you're moving to Fort Lauderdale. And I'm like, how did that word get back to Pensacola? He says, I have a friend that's going to spend his day in his summer in Provincetown, and he doesn't want to leave his condo empty. So if you'd like to live in it for 6 months and just, take care of the cat, you can live there. I said, okay. So for the first 6 months, I paid, I think, $200. Again, God just saying, you're supposed to be here, so here's a place to live. And then it was time to find a job. And again, this was in June. The end of the previous school ended like June 12th, and I moved on June 15th. I got here the 16th, and I started interviewing that whole summer. And I was getting nervous because school was going to start the following Monday. And a friend of mine says, hey, I'm going to this brunch on Sunday, and would you like to go? And I says, I don't know the host. That's awkward. And he says, oh, just come with me. I'm like, okay. So I talked to the host while I'm there. He says, what do you do? I says, I'm new to town looking for a job. I'm a teacher. He goes, oh, I'm a hairdresser, and I'm one of my clients is a principal at a high school or a junior high school. And he says, I'll just talk to him when I get to work tomorrow. So this was Monday. So he talks to him on Monday. The principal calls me on Tuesday. They said, come in for interview Wednesday. I go in Wednesday. They hire me Thursday, and school starts Monday. Again, just put it in place. And it's just one thing after the other. And now I'm teaching high school. I was at that junior high for 6 years, and literally I was walking, this is crazy. The first day I got here, like I said, the 16th, I went to Starbucks there on 26th, the old one that used to be there, and I had a cup of coffee, and I walk out, and all the tables are full except this one table, and there's a gentleman reading his book there, and I said, do you mind, there's no tables to sit at? And he said, no, go, of course. I'm, oh, what are you reading? He goes, oh, whatever it was, reading a book. And I introduced myself. He says, oh, I'm an English teacher too. I teach at such and such a school. I'm like, oh, that's nice. I don't have a job yet, but I'm looking. And that was really the extent of the conversation, but we exchanged numbers. 6 years later, I'm walking down the street, and he beeps his horn at me. Beep. I'm like, I'm looking at him, and I said, I know you. Took me a minute to connect. I'm like, you're Jim. You're the one that I met the very first day I lived here. He goes, my school's English teacher is retiring, and we need a replacement. And when I saw you, I felt like I needed to make that information known to you. So we're looking at applications tomorrow. So if you want to, get your resume together and send it today, and we'll start looking. So that was Sunday. He shared that with me. Monday they started looking. Tuesday he calls me and he says, hey, has Vicki called you, the principal? And I said, no, not yet. He says, I'm going to call her. I'm going to go in and I'm going to check to see where your resume is. And so he goes in, he says, look at this person. And she says, oh, I've already bypassed that. He spelled principal wrong. Because if my English teacher doesn't know how to spell principal, I'm probably barking up the wrong tree. And I had done my resume so quickly that I just didn't. It was spelled right. It was just the wrong principal. And so she brought me in on Thursday for an interview. She said, I'll give the guy a try. And Friday morning they called and said, if you'd like the job, we'd like you to come and teach high school English. So once again, another laying out of a job that belonged where I needed to be, and I can't be more thankful that I'm there and I'm teaching. Now I'm starting my 7th year at that school, and this year I've taken on the responsibility of the department head. So another progression of how God is just placing me in places he knows that I need to be. So enough of my background. You get who I am a bit. I just wanted to share a few things. I'm kind of running out of time, I guess.
Yeah, Nate did that on purpose, so it's so short.
A few verses that God has thrown at me the last several weeks. And I'm a storyteller in some cases, and sometimes it's just easier for me to write down my thoughts and then make some idea of them. Pastor Nate, again, we're talking a few weeks ago, and he said, and I came to him and I said, I'm at this place where I just don't know where to go next in the Bible. I've read lots, and I know what's in there, but I just need something fresh. He says, the Gospels are great, and why don't you try Mark, because it's the shortest? I said, good idea. So I started reading Mark, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. But Mark 5, there is three different situations, if you will, three different miracles that he performed, and I'm going to try to, let me just read it, it's just easier. I'm not going to read the whole scripture, but three specific miracles or acts of Jesus in Mark 5, each a different situation, and God saw the need and involved himself in these three different situations. The first, a man dwelled amongst the tombs, and this man, the tombs were obviously surrounded with dead people in the tombs, you get it. But he was possessed. He had demons in him. And he was living, if you will, in this graveyard. And he was, people had tried to bind him in chains to keep him from basically going crazy. And those chains could not bind him. He was always breaking out of them and kind of running around. And he would cut himself, and he would also end up getting out of the chains by kind of rubbing him against the rocks, it suggests. Jesus was approaching by this time. He had just done a whole day's worth of miracle working somewhere else. And he said, I need to kind of get away from this. I need a spite. I need some rest. And so he gets in the boat and he goes to the other side. And as he gets off, this man approaches him, the one that is possessed. And he was approached by this man and asked, what have you to do with me? Torment me not. The possessed man knew who Jesus was. He recognized, or it really was his spirit. Those demons recognized God in this man, and they basically say, don't torment me. We know what you can do, but please leave us alone. And Jesus commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. He then asked the unclean spirit, what is your name? And he says, my name is Legion, because there are many of us. This was not just one demon. There were hundreds. There are actually 2,000. It says later in the chapter that there were 2,000 demons living in this one man. And of course the man doesn't have any hope. It just, the legion begged of God not to send them out of the country. And there was a herd of swine nearby, and Jesus basically said, okay, you're not going to go out of the country, but you're not going to remain in this man. So he demands that these spirits leave this man's body, and they indwell the swine. And the swine immediately run off a cliff into the ocean and drowned. And again, it says that there's 2,000 unclean spirits. The shepherds that saw all this told others of what they had witnessed. So many people started to come and listen to the story of this man being healed. And people began to recognize the man who once was possessed is now a clean spirit. They recognized who he once was prior to the possession. And after all of these stories had been told, everybody that was hearing these stories became afraid and literally asked Jesus to leave them alone. He's like, we see what you're doing, but you're freaking us out, and we don't want to be around you. So they asked him to leave. And I wrote a little note here. It says, have you ever feared what God was asking of you to the point of asking him to leave you alone? You're scared of what you know he wants of you? You're like, I'm sure I'm not hearing that right. Sometimes I don't like what I'm hearing God telling me to do, so I might ignore it, or I pretend I don't hear whatever it was. Now, when Jesus was ready to leave the man who he healed, that man begged Jesus if he could stay with him. He saw his healer. He recognized Jesus for who he was. He says, please let me go with you. He had gotten back in the ship, and the man said, I want to go with you. And Jesus said, basically, no. I want you to go home, and I want you to tell your friends and your family about what great things the Lord has done in your life. I want you to be a witness. I want you to be a living witness of what I can do and what I have done for you. So, what's interesting to me about this is several chapters prior to it, every time God performed a miracle, he had asked everybody to keep their mouth shut. Don't tell anybody about what I've told you, what I've done here. Just go live your life. Let people see the transformation, if you will, of what I've done for you. You don't necessarily have to tell them how it happened, but just keep quiet. And I ask myself, why would God want that? Why does God want us not to share what he has done in our life? I really don't have an answer for that. But I think it was just the idea of God has his timing, and the people are going to hear what they need to hear when they need to hear it according to God's timing. And sometimes we think we're ready. We're eager. We want to do something. We're like, God's telling me to do this. So I'm just going to jump in and do it. But we don't have the means to do it yet. And he says, no. Kind of calm yourselves. Sit still. We don't like sitting still. We like action. We want things to get done, and we want them to get done now. And that's not always the case. So that's the first miracle, him drawing these demons out of this man and sending him on his way. The second one is the woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years. And I can't paraphrase this. I just got to read it. I'm sorry. So it says, and when Jesus was passed over again by ship onto the other side, so he left this group of people, he was tired, he moved to this side, he heals someone, and then he decides, oh, I'm going back. So he goes back, and he says, and when Jesus has passed over again by the ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. He was close to the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. So Jairus falls at the feet of Christ, or Jesus, and he says, I beseech you, or I beg you greatly, saying, my little daughter lieth at the point of death, and I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and surrounded him. Now, Jesus had all the intention of going with this man, and he did. He said, show me where your daughter, and they start moving towards this man's house. But while he's going, another story takes place, and this is where the woman with the unclean, the blood issue, she reaches out. She says here, and a certain woman which had an issue of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. When she had heard of Jesus, she came in and pressed behind, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about to the press and said, who touched my clothes? And the story goes on, and the disciples kind of laughed at him and said, God, we are surrounded by thousands of people. What do you mean, who touched me? It could have been any of these people. And it says, but the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him the truth. I did it. I knew. I'd seen you before and what has happened when others have touched you, and I knew if I had just touched your garment, I would be healed. And he says unto her, daughter, thy faith had made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. That's the second event, the second healing. And then the third one is Jairus, and he continued towards his house to heal his daughter. And on the way, a servant comes to him and says, don't bother, your daughter has died. There's no need for you to come. It's too late. And Jesus basically says, and soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no more to follow him, save Peter and James, John and the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entering in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. So now we have a third miracle where the daughter has been raised. What came to my mind when I was reading all of this is the fact, is our relationship with God an accident? Is it natural, meaning it's on purpose, or is it intentional? And so I'm going to read you a little bit about this, if I can find my... The man who was cleansed of his unclean spirit, legion, that encountered was accidental. We know that God knows everything. Yet, it wasn't necessarily planned that this man was going to stumble, if you will, upon God and ask that these demons be dismissed from him. Jesus knows all. It may have not been a coincidence per se that the two men ran into one another, but from the perspective, I sense Jesus was doing what was natural by leaving the ship to move forward with his day. While doing so, a man recognized him for who he is and approached him. This wasn't a planned situation. The second one, the woman with an issue of blood for the 12 years, she heard that Jesus was in town and heard of what he had done and could do. I imagine by this time she was exhausted of all her resources, and it tells us that she had nothing left. She tried everything, and she was kind of at her end's rope. She believed that Jesus' body was power in and of itself. And it says, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. In verse 29, straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. This is what amazed me. God knew immediately that virtue had gone out of him. Have you ever been at a point where you realize that your strength is just gone? You feel like there's nothing left. You've given all you can give. And it just, the fact that God could recognize the fact that, if you will, I am power, and someone's touched me, and that power has left me. And the fact that he recognized it, but where in and of itself is the fact that she had so much faith itself. He felt the power in which she believed in him. Ever come to a point during the day when you are literally just spent? I sense I have no more to give. My natural resources are depleted. Jesus recognized that someone had real faith, natural belief that he was capable of healing. He turned and looked about for the individual who drew this power from him. And the disciples again looked at him funny and saying anybody could have done it. But the woman who had been healed came forward and fell down before him and confessed and told the truth. What is more natural than the truth? When we are most vulnerable, no pretense, no hiding, we're the most raw. That is the state we need to be in as we approach God. There are no secrets. He knows everything about us. And despite of all that, he still wants to use you. And the third thing with this, the intentional, Jesus had all intention to help Jairus with his 12-year-old daughter. He was on his way to Jairus' house when the word came to Jairus that his daughter had died. The servant's message states it in verse 35. There is no longer need to trouble the master further. In verse 36, Jesus heard the message, and he tells the father, do not be afraid, just only believe. And we know, again, that the child was healed. My point is, when we look at our relationship with Christ, is it by accident? Do we wake up each morning going, I know God exists, but let's see what happens? Is it natural? Is it something that we are... I think some people, we joke around gay men having that decorating gene. It's just part of us, and it's natural. Just because you're gay, you can design something, and that's not always the case. But is our relationship with Christ natural? Is it just come naturally to us that we just want to be drawn to him? Or, which is not bad, is our relationship with Christ intentional? Do we wake up each morning going, God, I know who I am, and I know I'm not terribly great without your presence in my life. And how do you want me to live this day? How do you want to direct me? There's a song in Frozen 2, going back to Disney, and the title is Do the Next Right Thing. And when I heard that, watching that movie, I had no intention God was going to slam me down with it. But I often live my life that way. I don't know what's going to come tomorrow. I don't know what's going to come next week. I can plan. I can say these are the things I need to do. When I wake up and go to school every day, I sit down at my desk. I say, God, this room is going to be filled with children. How am I going to help them today? What is it you want me to do? What is the next right thing? Sometimes I have to put my curriculum aside because there's a child hurting. And I have to listen to what that child is saying to me because they really don't care what I have to say until they know that I care about them. And I think sometimes we have to recognize that in our own life when it comes to God. There's one verse, and I will try to make this quick. As I was continuing reading over the next several days, there was a Proverbs, Proverbs 14:8. And it says, the wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. And I think sometimes we enter our days not necessarily looking to understand why we do the things we do. And I took this as it's okay to ask God what's going on. I don't have the answers. I don't know what the answers are, but would you help me understand what it is that I'm doing? If I'm doing something wrong, just put that little pinch of nerve and say, that's not it. Let's try something different. And listen to it. I always hear that we sang the song, There's a Sweet, Sweet Spirit in This Place this morning. And I purposely asked Sean if we could sing that because sometimes we expect, I think, where this expectation comes from, I don't know, but God's going to knock us over the head and say, hey, I'm over here, you need to listen to me. And it's not that way. He just puts this little thought into our mind and says, this is what I'd like you to do. And if we just take a moment and stop and acknowledge first that this is from nobody else but God, because that thought would not be in my head any other way, that we would listen to it. So I'm going to go back to the initial scripture today, Proverbs 3. Listen to these first few verses, and being an English teacher, I often look at the prepositions and what is a part of the verse. And it says, "My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding, yea, if thou criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her, speaking of wisdom, as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." You got to do all these ifs first. And then the then falls into place. "For the Lord giveth wisdom, and of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding." Then we go to Proverbs 3, 5, 6, and 7, which we've all heard many times. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him. He shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." And I think sometimes as we read these verses, we go, yeah, I've heard this. I know what it means. I hear it. God just wants us to seek him. That's all. And in seeking him, when he shows us or tells us to recognize him in that situation, he's also asking us to depart from the evil. You know that's wrong. Don't do it. You know the consequence. It's not beneficial to you. But God, it's comfortable. I like it over here because I understand it. Or at least I know what's going to happen. But just think of all the wonderful things that God has in store for you over on this side if we just trust and obey. Back to what we originally said. So if you'd stay with me, we'll pray and then we'll say the Lord's Prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this morning. I pray that at some